Thanks for joining us again today. I'm Ali Kamali from People Fusion, and I am partnered here today with my Workplace HQ colleagues, Dai Long from Skilldare and Christy Housen from Osborne Law.
Morning, ladies.
Morning.
Today we thought that we might touch on the sorts of questions and scenarios that are coming up through recruitment practices. As we know, a big focus has been returning employees to the workplace, but certainly quickly followed by still needing to keep recruitment activity well underway. And I know personally, I've certainly been faced with a few, intriguing questions from employers and candidates alike. And I just thought I'd share some of those examples today with Christy and Di to get their input on how they would see us approach these sort of scenarios. Mm-hmm. So Di and Christy, you happy if I pose a few interesting questions to you?
Go for it.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, where will I start? So look, I guess, a couple of questions we've been getting from candidates inquiring about positions is, will the company be mandating vaccinations? And this is where the company isn't part of a public health order. And, as we're sort of digging into those questions further with candidates, it seems that it is from those that have chosen not to be vaccinated. And, comments have been made that if it is mandatory, they feel it is discrimination because they won't be getting an opportunity to apply for these roles. What comments would you make to a candidate that feels they are being discriminated against?
Mm-hmm. Well, from my perspective, with discrimination laws, at this current point in time, vaccination status is not a protected discriminatory attribute. So it isn't discrimination. It would only be discriminatory if the candidate actually had a proper medical contraindication certificate, which indicates that they can't be vaccinated for medical reasons. And that needs to be a form that is the approved form by the New South Wales Chief Health Officer. And it could be discriminatory on that basis, depending on the position and depending on the tiering, I guess, of that position. If that person was refused, or if that candidate was refused to be considered because of that protected attribute.
Mm. So by that, do you mean, Christy, if it was mandated in the workplace, but I was applying for a role that might be a low risk role, like an office position, for example, that I could, that arguably might not be a high risk position, that I might have an open door to say that it was discriminatory on the basis.
Only if you do have one of those certificates, Di.
Yeah.
So it has to be a proper approved form certificate.
Yes.
We have seen a lot during this pandemic of people have been getting certificates from their doctors to say that they can't wear masks because of various reasons like asthma or sleep apnea. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of different reasons, but this particular, the vaccination is really, it goes further than just a simple little letter from the doctor. Needs to be in the approved form. So if it is an exemption in the approved form, then you really need to look, as you say, at where that position sits in relation to the tiering and whether there are reasonable accommodations that you could make to that position, and really just look at the discrimination legislation. I mean, if it is an inherent requirement of that job, if there's someone, if they're going to be working with vulnerable people, if they're going to, if there's high traffic area in relation to who they're going to be in contact with, that could put them in, even with the medical contraindication certificate, it still may not be sufficient to be able to perform the inherent requirements of the job. But it does mean if you do see one of those certificates, you really need to take a step back and give proper consideration to that. But without that certificate, based on my understanding of how all of the discrimination legislation is drafted as at the current time, it is not being discriminatory towards someone if they choose not to be vaccinated. It's not protected by law.
From the companies that you're seeing mandating so far that aren't subject to a public health order, are you noticing sort of mandating but exceptions are, where they may be separating their positions within a company into the tiers that have been discussed?
to be honest, I'm not. Usually companies that are bringing it in, we've given specific advice on those particular companies as to whether we think it's reasonable or not, based on a number of factors. And those factors are outlined in the policies and the communications to the workforce around the justification, I guess, for bringing in the policy. We always do discuss those positions that, could be performed, for example, from home. But I'm not seeing too much I've certainly had employees applying for exemptions, but they're not being granted because of the particular role that those people have. What about you, Di?
Yeah, same. I think they're making it a fairly blanket rule for those that are doing it. We're not seeing huge amounts at the moment that are doing it, that are hardcore doing it outside the public health orders at this stage. But we are starting to have clients saying that, particularly around definitely around vaccinations, that they will continue after December 1 potentially to continue the stance on wanting people to be doubly vaccinated to either work or into their premises. So we are starting to see that.
I'm probably seeing a few more than what I'm seeing. Quite a few of our clients.
Are you?
Policies, yeah.
Yeah.
And definitely the post 1 December. And I think, as we spoke about earlier, the announcement from BHP in relation to their workforce, clearly they're looking at beyond 1 December and they've seen it reasonable. It'd be really interesting to see how they're going to apply that policy, whether it is across the board to the entire workforce or whether it is only going to be in relation to certain positions. But I think it does indicate there is, certainly in the bigger employers, there is that real
push towards.
And by the sounds of that, it would be important, say, for myself or for our business, or even the people that are conducting the recruitment activity, to clearly understand the policy and how it's to be adopted. Okay,
that's right.
Good on. Another example that has come up this week is where we have a client who is very pro wanting to interview in person as opposed to on Zoom to make their final decision. Of a panel of 4, 2 are unvaccinated and no intention of being vaccinated. What responsibility do you see that an organisation has to advise candidates that they may be interviewed in person by people that are unvaccinated?
I would imagine there would be a requirement. So people understand, I think out of respect and fairness, I think it would be a requirement. What do you think, Christy?
Yeah, look, I think that most businesses still need to remember that if they can work from home, if individuals can perform their job from home, they should be working from home. So, technically they could be in breach of the public health order by wanting to show up for an interview in person when they technically could probably do it remotely. So there's a potential risk to start with. But I think where a business is concerned, the advice that we give is for businesses, and it's all about risk minimisation. And I think it would be, not that there's any law saying this, but I think it would be a good risk minimisation strategy, particularly at the moment while we have transmission in the LGAs or in Newcastle LGA and certainly surrounding LGAs. I think it would be, a good risk minimisation strategy to be upfront with candidates to say that, not disclosing who the people are for privacy reasons, but saying that, in this interview panel, there is someone that's going to be on the panel that is not vaccinated for COVID, just so that, again, it's just that tick to say, well, I've minimised the risk. I've given this person the opportunity to do the interview by Zoom. In order to fulfill my work health and safety obligations, to not only to on the interview panel, but to people coming onto the premises.
And this will change again in December 1 potentially, won't it?
Well, it may, and it may change when the transmission reduces.
Yes.
They're going to be very different conversations when there isn't any transmission or minimal transmission in the LGA.
Right.
At the moment, it's a particularly interesting time in Newcastle because our numbers are still quite high, and it's a legitimate concern, particularly with the Delta strain.
Yes,
absolutely. And look, I guess probably the final scenario that I'll share is where clients, being employers, are asking us if candidates have been vaccinated or are planning to be vaccinated. And this is again where the employer is not part of a public health order. Now, they also haven't chosen yet to be mandating vaccinations in their business, but I guess that decision for them is still pending, and this has come up a number of times. What's your view on our right to ask candidates if they've been vaccinated or planning on being vaccinated as part of the recruitment process? And, where do you think maybe it would be reasonable to be asking those questions in the timeline?
I think a lot of it will depend on the policies that the organisation has in place around vaccinations and around their COVID safety plan. I think a lot of it's going to be a case by case, Ali, in terms of the type of position we're talking about and the requirements for each role. If it is a role that's customer facing, for example, or if it's they're dealing with potentially vulnerable people or needing to go on site to clients' premises who have got mandated policies in place, for example, then I think it's entirely reasonable. I think it may certainly be an inherent requirement of the position. So so again, I think there's no clear cut one size fits all approach to this. I think it'll be very dependent. And I think that's why employers have got to start really having a very balanced approach and a very reasonable approach to what they're requiring of their employees when they're bringing them into the business or those that are currently in their business. It really has to be a reasonable, balanced approach, I think.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, they're going to find out eventually if they've got to sign, for an example, an employment contract which provides for, vaccination status, like it may in relation to working with children checks and driver's licenses. May just end up being, a standard clause in an employment contract that says, you must comply with these. So I think it's probably better to be upfront in relation to those discussions earlier on, as opposed to having a candidate accept a role and going through all of that time and then presenting an employment contract and the person refuses to sign it. I think it's particularly at the moment, I think it's better to be open and honest and have those conversations now. I don't have a problem with businesses asking the question, but I guess you need to be prepared for a potential candidate refusing to answer it, and they can answer it. They don't have to answer that question, and then it's really going to be well what happens next. It's not discriminatory, as I indicated before. So that's important to remember. But if they refuse to answer the question, or it's really then going to be up to the employer to decide whether to proceed with that candidate or not.
Oh, it's very valid.
There's certainly many many examples that have already come to life, where say large mining companies that have already mandated where the sales reps to go on site will have to be vaccinated, or if you're visiting aged care facilities as a provider of a service. So there's many examples that have already come to life that you really do need to know up front.
Definitely.
There are plenty of examples at the moment, unfortunately. Not seeing any case decisions, and we won't for a while. So it really is, it's a time where we're really trying to interpret the legislation, and often you can read something twice and you've got to be prepared to advise your clients and to say, look, this could be read either of these ways. I know it's not the 100% definitive answer that you want, but we need to advise you the risks of both of these particular of a certain clause being accepted.
Absolutely. Well, ladies, thank you for your input.
Thanks, Al. Good luck recruiting.
Great questions, Al.
And I think it's fair to say from one week to the next, new things keep coming up for us all.
Sure.
That's exactly right.
So we'll be sure to look at next week's topics that might be seen as most relevant, and endeavour to have another session like this that we can distribute to everybody as well.
Sounds good.
I think once we get that new public health order, which we're still awaiting the amendments for after the announcement yesterday, I think once we get that, we can definitely look at having another talk. But probably not too much point talking about it today because we just don't have it yet.
We don't have it yet. Sounds good.
Yes. And is that pending like early next week?
I have no idea.
No idea. Okay.
The announcements were obviously made yesterday morning. Yes. And we're still waiting on the updated public health order.
Yes.
The announcement yesterday.
Yeah.
Lovely.
There's somebody's phone going.
To update everybody, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Bye.
Bye.